So the first slide is really a bit of background, and I've called it "Everything is changing faster and faster." We hear this, don't we, a lot in all sorts of contexts. You know, everything's speeding up. But the one thing that is definitely speeding up is something that's called Moore's law. And this was Gordon Moore, who was one of the founders of Intel, who in 1965 actually wrote a piece which said the processing power broadly of a chip would double roughly every 2 years. And that was really to do with the number of transistors that could be fitted onto a chip. So 1958, as you see on that y-axis, you had one transistor on the chip. And by 2024, you have the equivalent of about 4.3 billion. So that means that doubling process didn't last the 10 years that he predicted it would in 1965. It's gone on. And that's why you've gone from having a pocket calculator in 1974-ish and being very excited about that to an iPhone in 2008, which has got more processing power than the computers that put Apollo 11 on the moon. So that's what's behind all of this. And just to be clear, that axis, that's a pretty scary curve, but actually even that doesn't really tell you the story. Because if you put that y-axis to scale, 30 billion would be 2 slides further up. So that's how quickly the processing power is growing and still growing. Now, there are some reasons to believe that it might slow down. There are also quite a lot to believe that it won't. So that means that we're going to move very quickly from where we are now to even more processing power and even more ability. And every week, literally every week, there's another version of another bit of AI release that's more powerful and better than the previous version. So that's just a bit of background. So what is artificial intelligence? Well, I've got a couple of definitions here which are helpful. The bold word there is mine. And its ability to mimic human cognitive functions. So mimic, it's not actually thinking AI, it doesn't think, but it does what it does so well that it appears to. And it does lead people to start interacting with these models in a way as if they were human. And funnily enough, that's the best way to interact with them, is to pretend that it's your best friend or your best and cleverest friend. It's just the best way to use it. But it doesn't literally think. But there are some reasons to believe that they might end up thinking, but we can go back to that later. So through AI, a computer system uses math and logic to simulate the reasoning that people use to learn from information to make decisions. So again, it's simulate. It's not actually doing it, but it looks like it is. And so for all intents and purposes, it is doing so. And these systems have now passed 2 important tests. One is called the Turing test. Alan Turing, one of the sort of godfathers of AI, who said that we'll reach the point where if a system can fool another human into believing that it's actually human, then you've got AI basically. And we've been there long ago. And then the Lovelace test, which is, can a computer simulate human creativity? And again, not in all ways and not in all fields, that test has definitely been passed, because it can create images that you would believe only a human could create. This then brings up the question of, are we heading towards what's called AGI, so artificial general intelligence, when these systems can do everything that a human can do? And the answer is we're heading there, but we're not there yet. And that's just the source reference for those 2 particular quotes. So how does it work? Well, in reality, it's just a fancy autocomplete mechanism. So the same way that when you type a piece of text into your box on your iPhone or whatever else it may be in your computer, and it autocompletes for you, that's really what AI is doing. But it's really a very fancy autocomplete system. It's incredibly clever and it's incredibly complicated. What it does is it breaks down the sentence that you give it that you want to ask a question with, a prompt, into words and then tokens. Tokens are parts of words, sometimes whole words, but usually parts of them. And it breaks them down and then looks at them in the context of all the other words or tokens in the sentence. And the way it does that, to examine them in relation to each other, is by vectors. And so a vector is broadly an array of ones and zeros in a square, if you like. But the problem is that these ones are highly complex. So they have hundreds of dimensions, sometimes 500 dimensions to a single vector. So that would mean that the way, for example, the word high forming part of highly in this sentence, that would be analyzed in the context in which it's in, with the word letter A before it, the li after it, and everything else in that sentence, including meaning, so semantic meaning of that sentence. So really very complicated way of analyzing small bits of text. It then uses what's called an attention mechanism to formulate answers. So this is the process of examining then all those relations and then generating through the model answers which seem to provide clarity to the question that you're asking. Somebody asked about accuracy, and I think that was the first question, wasn't it, from group one? So as the complexity and processing power grows, so does accuracy. That means that the systems start to make fewer and fewer obvious mistakes. There are some lovely stories about the mistakes that have been made, including one very recently about McDonald's using AI in its drive-ins in the US, and people getting billed for £220 worth of stuff, and dollars rather, and all sorts of other funny orders with mix up of goods. And this comes back to the point that it is very, very powerful, but we don't quite know at the moment where the jagged frontier of capability is. And by the jagged frontier, it's Ethan Mollick's term, but it means that it's good at some things, not quite so good at others. Sometimes it seems to work brilliantly, other times not quite so well. And so at the moment, we're definitely at the level of it being a co-pilot or a co-intelligence that we can use alongside ourselves, but we mustn't get fooled into believing everything it tells us is true, or that everything it tells us is accurate, because like a very good consultant, it's very persuasive, and therefore you believe what it says, but you need to check, and you still need to fact check. Having said that, it doesn't make the sort of mistakes that it did even a few months ago. So the data question, where is the data stored? This is really important. People worry about uploading, say, their CV or their health data to the model, and somehow their health data being stored in the model itself. Well, it isn't. The way the models are trained is on all the data that they can gain freely, sometimes paid. So all the internet, every single library which has free data, the models are trained on that stuff. And then they are further trained in what's called fine-tuning, using more data later on. Now, your data is stored, though, in the model owner. So if you use ChatGPT, OpenAI, for example, through OpenAI, if you upload something, that data is stored by the owner of the model. Or if you're using Google Gemini, your data will be stored by Google. Now, if you pay for your version of the model that you're using, so Gemini or ChatGPT 4 Omni, if you're paying, you're under license with that organization. So that's a license agreement where they say your data will not be used in fine-tuning, it will not be used in further training runs, and therefore your data is as safe as it being stored anywhere else that it might be stored. If you're using a computer at work, you will almost certainly be using Amazon Web Services or one of the other big data providers in cloud storage, and your data will be encrypted in transfer, and it will be encrypted when it's stored, but it will be stored by that organization. And it's the same thing here, but it's not stored literally in the model. So your data is never going to be extracted literally from the model. You might get a data breach, but I would be more worried about my data being stored in the NHS, which it is, than my data being stored by Google or by Amazon, because they have much better data security than the NHS, as an example, or HMRC, or any other organization you can think of. So I'm not worried particularly about data, particularly if I'm not using the free version. If you're using the free version, your data is available to that organization to use in fine-tuning runs. Even then, I don't think it's likely your data is going to get extracted literally from the model. Nobody's going to the model looking for people's personal data to do marketing with or anything like that. So I'm not particularly worried about it, but you should be aware that if you are paying, your data is under license, and therefore it should be safe, or as safe as it is anywhere. So that's the answer to, I think, is my data safe? And if people have got more questions around this, happy to come back to it later. So this has been the development path of GPT. ChatGPT is the chat bot that you use to access these models. And GPT-3 was, what, 2.5, 3 years ago. 3.5 then came out, which was the one that everyone got very excited about in November-ish 2022. And then we moved on to GPT-4 and Turbo, and now O is Omni. And GPT-4 Omni, you now have access to for free if you want to use the free version through OpenAI. And you can use the other versions if you want to, although why you'd want to, I wouldn't know, because 4 Omni is the one you should be using because it's the one that's most powerful. So the big leap was 3.5 to 4, and I call it bicycle to Ferrari. That's the difference in processing power. And when I had conversations with my friends from business school, even a few weeks ago, over dinner, and they were saying, oh, you're so evangelistic about this AI, and it's not that good. And I'd say, what do you mean it's not that good? And they'd say, oh, well, I got all these stupid results. And it became apparent to me that they were using the then free version 3.5, whilst I was using the paid for version 4 Turbo at the time. And we were discussing what a bicycle can do versus what a Ferrari can do. GPT-5 may not be that far away, and I suspect that will be fighter jet compared to Ferrari, but I don't know because it hasn't arrived yet. What's the difference? Parameters, the number of ways in which it analyzes the data that you upload or the sentence that you give it to answer a question to. Size of context window, this is really important. The context window is the amount of information that the model can process in one go in relation to a question that you're asking. So with 3.5, that was limited, and with 4 Omni, it's 10 times greater, but we'll come back to that. Accuracy, this was mentioned. Accuracy increases with processing power and with more fine-tuning runs to eliminate biases, mistakes, errors, all sorts of things that give you wrong answers. Usefulness, 4 is just way more useful in ways that we'll see in a minute. So 3.5, parameters are broadly weights and biases in the system. This is the way the system codifies and uses the tokens that you give it to analyze. And the context window, so the amount of data it can look at in any one request, was about 16K, 4K depending on how you look at it, but 16K is probably the right number to take. So what was 3.5 good for? It could create coherent text based on prompts. A lot of what came back looked like proper writing. It didn't look like nonsense. It looked goodish. Simple Q&A, it was quite good at that. So it was good at powering ChatGPT. You could use ChatGPT to question the model about all sorts of things that you wanted to ask it. But it struggled with more complex things and gave lots of hilarious wrong answers that we'll come to. And here they are. I mean, you can read those through yourselves. The one I like best is the last one because I just find it very funny. That's the sort of stuff. And then there were lots of stories about lawyers in the US using it in court cases and not checking what it had produced for them, citing cases as case law, and then discovering that actually it invented the whole case law completely, and they hadn't bothered to check it, and the judge then fined them for not having done their jobs properly, and all sorts of stuff like this. This sort of problem is becoming much less frequent now they're onto 4. So what's for Omni? So it's got 10 times as many parameters. So it's that 10 times as powerful. The context window is broadly 10 times as big, which means you can do many more things with it. You can ask much more complicated questions and ask it to do much more complicated stuff. What's it good for? You can analyze whole documents. So you can attach a whole document. I've done it recently with a document that was 176 pages about models of other countries Britain should look at since the Second World War. How have they been economically successful? They included Poland, Germany, France, Singapore, Hong Kong. And this was too much for me to read before going to a lunch to discuss it with somebody. So I asked it to summarize each of the sections, give me, across those sections, common themes, and give me, please, 3 interesting talking points, which it did in about 30 seconds. It's multimodal, as they call it, which means it can deal with voice, images, video, very large data sets, and natural language, so the natural language that you speak in. It can power very sophisticated conversation agents and do real-time translation, for example. You can do real-time translation between languages at an exceptionally advanced level. Content creation, it's brilliant now at creating content. I was reading just this afternoon that the latest art creation pieces of AI create art that is just phenomenally good. It's just amazingly good. Decision-making support. A friend of mine who's a pediatric consultant in A&E asked it a series of very detailed questions about how to deal with a hypothetical 2-month-old baby brought into an A&E by a very worried mother with a very high temperature. What should you do? She said it nailed every single process and procedure. It even nailed, don't forget to document your decisions because that's really important because you can't get sued if you've documented things properly. She was amazed. And as people often say, oh dear, do I have a job next week? To which the good answer is, thankfully, you will have, because it's a co-intelligence at the moment and it isn't going to take your job. Yeah, comparing vast data sets and comparing multiple versions of pretty much anything. So if you've got a whole load of reports, you want to compare them for particular bits of info, you can do it very easily. All sorts of stuff. Now we're on to prompting. This is the question of how you use it, which is one of the questions that was raised. How do you become good at it? And the answer is trial and error and learning by doing. There are lots of good guides on the internet actually about prompting. And way back when in the US, in particular, people were calling themselves AI whisperers because they knew how to ask questions that got the best answers, including things like, "You are a wizard" from Harry Potter, and therefore, you get a better answer by saying "you are a wizard." Some of this stuff amazingly still works. So there was recently an interesting thing about the best way to get answers to complicated maths questions was to suggest to the AI that you were on a starship Enterprise traveling towards a far galaxy, needing to answer very important questions so the world would not be exterminated, and it gave the best answers when prompted in that way. All of this is becoming defunct as the models get better and better, and it's just now a question of being able to ask logical questions in ways that elicit the best answers. Chain of thought prompting is the best way to go about this. So rather than just asking it something simple, you ask, explain the steps I should take to transition from a marketing role to a data science role. You're asking it to tell you the steps rather than how do I get a job in data science? You could do it like this. You could break it down into a series of steps. So what are the transferable skills I need? What data science skills do I need in particular? How do I get practical experience? How would I update my resume and my LinkedIn to prove that I've done the work in order to make this switch that I want to make? How should I network and apply for roles? Give me a clue about where I should go for networking opportunities on the internet or elsewhere. And how do I apply for jobs? In general, give the AI examples of what it is you're looking for. So that might be explaining in detail the steps you'd like to take to get there, but it might also be uploading a copy of something that you want something to look like. I'm looking for a job that looks like this. Can you think of other jobs that might be like it? If you give it the detail of the steps you'd like to take like this, outline results, produce a draft, revise the draft, and then produce a polished output, you'll see the steps that it's taken, and you might want to go back to one of those intermediate steps and then ask a series of questions around that to get a better direction for the AI to take in order to get to the polished output at the end. And again, you'll find that just playing with it and doing this is how you get to know what is a good prompt. You'll get an intuitive feel for this prompt's going to look good. What you can also do, which seems counterintuitive but is not, if you're in the process of asking ChatGPT or one of the other models a load of questions and you're not really happy with the answers that you're getting, you can ask it, what prompts should I give you in order to get a better answer to my question? And you can ask it to help you along the way. Quite amazing, but it does work. So if you think about career development, what sort of things might you want to ask? Ask it to perform a self-assessment. So you might say, can you help me identify my strengths and weaknesses based on my resume? You might want to give it some stories of some successes and failures you've had at work. You can dictate them by voice now if you want to, and say, how should I use these in designing my CV? How good does my CV look compared to people who are applying for roles that I want? All sorts of ways you can ask it to assess you in terms of what it is you want to do. You can anonymize your resume, obviously, before you upload it. Personally, I wouldn't bother. I don't see any need to, but if you feel that uncomfortable about it, of course, you can do so. Exploring career paths. So I've got experience and skills in project management and data analysis. Give me some other examples of things that I might do with this. It'll come up with all sorts of things, and then you can investigate those further, like tell me more about this one, or what other ideas do you have about that? And it's really good at getting started with things if you ask a sort of an open-ended question like that. In particular, so some more detailed stuff, it's brilliant at drafting emails. Sometimes you might want to draft it yourself and say, rewrite this for me. You can do it either way around. Draft me an email to this person about this subject, or I've drafted this one, have a look at it, please suggest improvements. Retaining my own style, please, as far as you can. Writing it in more British English, you can do that. Sometimes if you say more British English, it'll do things like say, oi mate, how you doing? But I'm sort of joking, but it does a bit. If you really push it and ask it to really go very British or very, I don't know, you get my idea. If you really push it, it'll give you some quite funny answers. Cover letters, obviously, lots of people are doing this. So I think the trick here is when you've asked it to draft it for you, top and tail it yourself to make it a bit your own. Otherwise, it does look a little bit generic because people are getting used to reading very similar letters written by AI. Draft and review your CV. I've done this. In fact, I had my CV professionally written earlier this year, and that was based on me having to write a lot of detailed information that took me about 3 hours about things I'd done in my career. And the CV that came back was really good, and I really enjoyed the process. And then I thought, well, I'll ask ChatGPT to do the same using the same data as the CV writer did, and it produced a version that was A, very similar, and B, very good. It's really good on LinkedIn profiles. If you take sections of your LinkedIn profile, you can ask it to review or improve, or can you suggest changes based on X, Y, Z? And the way to do that, by the way, is if you click in LinkedIn, you can actually click on the 3 buttons and download a PDF of your profile. And then when you've got the PDF of your profile, it's very easy to upload it to ChatGPT and ask it to analyze all of it or some of it, whatever it is you want to do. Comparing your CV to job requirements. If there's a job spec put out there, upload your CV and say, how well do I fit? What else how can I rewrite my CV to make it a better fit for this particular job? How should I write the cover letter to go with it? All of this is very easy and very quick to do. It's very good at enhanced search. So ChatGPT 4 on me, the other major LLMs that you guys have mentioned, they all have now what's called RAG, which is a way of the LLM going to the internet to gain better context before processing your query. So it's very good now at searching for stuff, and you'll find if you use it that if you ask it a question like what are the best restaurants near me in W10, you'll see that it goes straight onto the internet to actually investigate. But it'll go onto the internet, find the restaurants, look at reviews, and tell you which ones are the best pretty quickly. Better than you reading the reviews yourself, probably. And then 2 other things here: perplexity.ai. A lot of people are using this. I've used it a bit. I'm not sure for me that it's actually any better than ChatGPT 4, but some people seem to like it. And Malt AI, I put it there because it's been actually developed by a friend of mine. The UK version is coming this week, and that gives you multimodal access to all of the main models. So you can pick and choose which model you want to use within Malt AI. I don't know what it costs, I'm afraid. He gave me free access, so I don't know. Don't know if he's even decided, but that is coming. And I think that'll be quite useful for people who want to use different models for different things. Claude, for example, is very good at writing English, probably better than ChatGPT. But I would say they're all developing so quickly that it probably doesn't matter which one you use, so long as you're using the latest version of the model. Just some specifics. Preparing for interviews. Can you provide me common interview questions for a software engineer position and suggest good answers? It's really good at this. It'll suggest the questions you might get and suggest how you might answer them. And again, you can iterate this. You can try it and then ask it for some more detailed questions on some things if you want to. But it's really easy to use and gives you a really good way of testing yourself out before you get to the actual interview. A level further, so you can be very detailed in terms of what you're asking. This is something I made up. Can't remember where I got this from, but from somewhere. You can see what I'm trying to get to, though. You can ask very detailed questions about a specific job where you've got particular skills which may or may not fit, and how can you best answer the types of questions you may get based on what your CV looks like to the recruiter. So very powerful way of being prepared. So in summary, incredible opportunity for productivity growth. You'll find if you use it, you can get stuff done way more quickly than you could in the past. I just get through so much more work now because I just outsource basically stuff to it. It's going to be economy-wide. It'll be industry-specific, so industries will get disrupted and jobs will change. And how that happens will play out over time. We don't know. But I think personally also very powerful. The ability to do lots of stuff and also interesting. Once you start playing with it, you realize you can ask it all sorts of questions about all sorts of things that you're interested in. And it will give you interesting answers and lead you on to further questions and areas you want to investigate. So I think it's incredible. Change incredibly fast. I started with the exponential curve. My children get very bored of me talking about exponential curves and how much I love them. I'm fascinated by them. I mean, this one, I never forget this. You start with 1 grain of rice on a 64 square chessboard, and you double each following square. So 2 on the next, 4, 8. How many have you got on the 64th square? Well, the answer is 2 to the power of 63, which is a lot of grains of rice. It's quite a mouthful, in fact. In fact, the chessboard to fit those on would be about 15 kilometers, sorry, 1,500 kilometers square. So it's the size of a country. We just can't comprehend these exponential curves as humans. We find it very difficult to do stuff which isn't linear. Always use the latest models, because otherwise you're just behind and there's no point. When they're for free, you might as well use them, or for $20 a month if it's OpenAI. Understand the risks of your data, and especially regulatory, legal, and compliance risks if you're using other people's data. This is important because although I don't think anything much is going to go wrong, you still got to comply with the regulations and laws in place. And so if you're uploading other people's data to it, be very careful with what you're doing and understand the license agreement you've signed with the AI you're using, and don't upload other people's stuff to free versions. You really must not be doing that. I think this is really important. No one has got all the answers. I've spoken to some pretty clever data scientists in the last 6 months who are amazing at what they can do. And even they say, I'm amazed every day at what I don't know, is what they say, because these models do stuff which they can't understand how it's good at it, and other stuff they can't believe it's useless. So you've just got to play with it and enjoy it.